So I was having a discussion a while ago with my girlfriend, a couple of weeks ago, and for some reason the subject of me being autistic came up, and I was like, "Do you think I'm autistic?" And she was like, "Yes, definitely," without missing a beat, you know. Actually, it wasn't in a mean way, but she was just like, "Yeah, I definitely think you are." And I was surprised by how quickly she answered the question, you know. I don't remember why I thought it initially, it just came up for some reason. And I wasn't offended by this. It's not neither of us consider it to be a bad thing, so it wasn't you know, it's not pejorative. But it kind of runs in my family, and it's not something I ever really considered myself generally, but yeah, it came up for whatever reason, and she was like, I do. And I've never cared about stuff like that, and I've done some videos before about the DSM and why I think the DSM is kind of quite flawed, and in many more ways than is acceptable, I think it's like counterproductive and harmful to people. And I don't really believe in labels and definitions in the way that they are currently used, which I think is very excessive. So it's something that kind of, to some degree, kind of to even think about it in that way, to think about myself in that way, kind of goes against my philosophy, because I feel like we're all individuals, we're all who we are. You could take two people who are defined as autistic and they would be completely different, and there might be similarities, but in a sense, because these things are all subjectively diagnosed, we've just chosen to connect those similarities, or to highlight those similarities, and to group people based on certain tendencies. But you could make up a lot of other conditions based on other personality traits that would be just as valid, really, you know, because essentially, like, a large number of these things are very subjective. So that's how I've always felt about that. But anyway, it kind of intrigued me, probably in a kind of narcissistic way. I was just like, am I autistic? Does this change my life in any way? If I find this out for sure, will that make me any different, or will it make my life easier? Or will it give me maybe an elevated form of status in some way? Or will it make people more able to understand me? Or will people give me more leeway for things? I'm going to close the door because people are having a chat outside, and it's kind of, I know it's triggering my autism. And I started to think about it quite a lot, and I was sort of excited by the idea that I might be autistic, you know, and mostly in a silly way, in a light-hearted kind of way, you know. But I was thinking about it a lot, and I thought, I never considered myself in that way, and I never really thought about things in that way. And at the same time, it was also a bit difficult, because I felt a bit less like me, because I've always very strongly identified as myself. I have like an extremely strong sense of self as me, as Kieran. And then suddenly in my mind I was a bit like autist, and just slapping that label on myself. This is water, by the way, if you don't know if it's even showing up on the camera. I just had a shower. I'm not pouring sweat. Doing a video called Am I Autistic, and I'm just pouring sweat. Like I'm really nervous. So anyway, I started to feel a bit like it was a bit challenging as well at the same time. It was a bit challenging as well as being kind of like exciting. It was a bit challenging, and I thought like, well, I didn't really think, but I felt like, sorry if you can hear the dog panting, by the way. Her fan was making a noise, so I turned it off, and now she's panting a lot, but she's all right. She's a half golden retriever, so they just pant excessively. Shut up, Luna. 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 There you go. I'm still doing it. Okay. Anyway, maybe I'll give her a biscuit in a minute. I started to feel that way. Yeah, that that's when I look at it now, I can see that, like subconsciously I felt a bit less like me, to be honest. And I've started to think about things more from the perspective of, I'm going to give her a couple of biscuits and put her next door. Hang on. All right. Yeah, she's next door now. Bless her. She's so excited to go to bed. She literally ran to bed. She loves going to bed now. She's kind of an old lady. And she has a fan in each room, so we crank her bedtime fan up on full, and she absolutely loves getting into bed. She's like, in the daytime, she's like a puppy, and at night she's like an old lady, Yeah, so I would think about things more, and I'd think, that's because I'm autistic. And I never used to do that. I used to think, that's me, I'm Kieran. That's why I'm like that, because I'm like that, because that's me. And I think, that's because I'm autistic. Now, what am I more? Am I, assuming I'm autistic, I'm not officially diagnosed, am I Kieran or autistic? Obviously I'm more Kieran than I'm autistic. So my sort of peculiarities and tendencies and preferences and behaviours are better most of the time looked at through the lens of me being me. And you might say, oh yeah, but autistic people tend to have certain difficulties, so it's helpful for them to understand those from the perspective of them having some kind of condition, or fine, but you can understand them in exactly the same way as an individual. You can still understand your own difficulties. They might not be prescribed, they might not be written out to you, there might not be a website that has them written down. Hopefully no one's made a website of all of your behavioural issues and shortcomings as a person, but they're just as easily understood in that way. So all that you really do, I think, not all that you really do, but I think most of what happens then is that you just kind of put yourself in a box, and it's very self-limiting in a way, because you decide that that's what I do. And for me, the concept of myself, of Kieran, is a very fluid, constantly changing thing. The concept of autism is not fluid and constantly changing. The concept of autism is relatively rigid and fixed. So should you define yourself as something that has the capacity to change and update constantly, or define yourself as something that is rigid and shared with many other people and written out for you to some degree? And I know people have different types of autism and they experience it in different ways, but you start to think, okay, I do that because I'm autistic, and so maybe I don't need to change that. Or you don't believe that you'll change that, and you think, I'm just going to be like this forever because I'm autistic, rather than saying, oh, I should maybe stop doing that, or maybe I should work on this. So I do understand that there is some value in having a diagnosis, but I don't think most of the time that's worth it. I think the cons outweigh the pros. And I've noticed a lot of people are very eager to have a diagnosis because for them, in some ways, it helps them to feel like they have more of a sense of self. But I think in some cases it prevents people from ever having a fully realised sense of self. I think it's like a placeholder, like a substitute for having a very strong individualized sense of self. And if you don't have the confidence to have that, then defining yourself as ADD. I see it a lot with people with ADHD. You go on a YouTube video where someone has talked about ADHD, and they'll go, they make these comments where they talk about ADHD like it's like everyone who has it is the same. And they go, people with ADHD do this, people with ADHD do that. I have ADHD, so I do this, so I do that. My ADHD brain makes me do this or whatever. And it feels like this isn't something that people have just begrudgingly resigned themselves to. It feels like actually a lot of the time, especially for younger people, something they've grabbed hold of because it gives them a feeling of identity, maybe of belonging. But I don't think it's so much about belonging, because most of this stuff we do and say on the internet is quite solitary and quite centered around ourselves, you know, and it's not intended to really be, most of the time, actually, like it's about us really as individuals, you know, I think most of the time. So I don't think it's so much about a sense of belonging. I think it's about a sense of identity and a way of looking at yourself and a way of defining yourself and perceiving yourself. And I definitely think that's more appealing when you're younger, when you don't know yourself as well. But some people don't get to know themselves that well. They don't have that privilege, and they grow older and they still cling on to these identities. And look, I understand in some cases it's very useful. I'm not talking here about, by the way, severe autism. I'm talking about people that are high functioning enough to even be having this kind of conversation. And in those cases, I think autism is frequently, or what is defined typically as autism, is frequently like akin to a heightened power. I think many of the smartest people in the world are what we would call autistic. So in this instance, I'm not really talking about people who are kind of like non-verbal or extremely low functioning. And I'm also, you know, I'm not really applying this to things that are quite outside of my remit of understanding, like schizophrenia and stuff like that, and also where I think the ramifications are quite different. I think if you have schizophrenia, it's quite important to know that you have schizophrenia, because, well, for a lot of obvious reasons, it's important to know if you have schizophrenia, particularly because it's very important to know that the way you're perceiving things when you have paranoid delusions is not correct, and that it's a product of an illness. But if you're autistic, and it means you're extremely orderly and you like patterns and you get really obsessed with certain topics and you love consuming loads of information and certain things bother you and then you really like other things, that's not an illness. It's just like, those are personality quirks, and some of them are amazing, like, and have produced amazing results. So you don't really need to know that. If you have something like schizophrenia and you have really scary paranoid delusions and the potential to make you do crazy things, dangerous things, it's very important to know. You have a medical condition. I don't feel, if I do or don't have it, the kind of autism that I may or may not have is a medical condition. It's not I'm completely functional, like I'm just, fine. I'm more high functioning than the average person, like quite orderly and just, good at doing things and stuff. So it's not a medical condition. So then what the fuck is it? Like, what would I be defining myself as? What's the point? There isn't really a point. And at the very least, the point that there might be, I think, is outweighed by the downsides of doing so. And the thought that came to me today was, I'm really glad I didn't have this idea when I was younger, because I tried to define myself as having a lot of things when I was younger. was very keen to be diagnosed as dyspraxic, I decided at a certain point I had borderline personality disorder. And at the time, my behaviour did more or less qualify as such. But I certainly now am not like someone who has borderline personality disorder, which, if you know anything about it, is like very, very, very extreme. And even when I maybe would have technically, or could have maybe been diagnosed as such, I would have been on a much lower end in terms of severity. And what does it even mean? You know, you can't, most of these things, you can't see them in a brain scan, you can't take a blood test for them. Some of them you can, but most of them, you know, they're very subjective. So I think it helps more to think about your symptoms. Like, it's very helpful for me to think about the fact that I can get very obsessed with things and latch on to things. That's why I was thinking about it. That's why I started wondering if I was autistic, because sometimes when I get stressed out by stuff, I have a very unusual response to it. And I start like disassociating, and my brain shuts down, and my brain starts to like shut down. And I don't even know if that's autism or what it is, but it's very weird. And it didn't occur to me until a couple of weeks ago how weird it is, how sometimes my brain gets, and to be honest, I think that might be caused by something else. It might be long term being subjected to like trauma for quite a sort of long period of time, because I think maybe my brain has just like had enough and can't really cope with it, with stress. Or it's autism or something, I don't know. Or it's just me, you know, it's just how I am, it's just what happens, it's just my brain, and it doesn't need a name. But it's helpful for me to know that. It's helpful for me to know that I have this tendency. It's also helpful for me to know that when plans get changed, I get pretty stressed out. Like, sometimes I get very angry and very stressed out when plans get changed, and I really struggle to let go of what I was planning and what's happening. What's happening now, I struggle to sort of transition between those two things. And that's really useful. That's really beneficial for me to know. Because when it's happening, I can go, maybe I'm being a bit weird about this, and this is a tendency that I have. So it's very helpful to know yourself. But it's helpful to know yourself as you. And I think in many cases it's very unhelpful to use a kind of like cookie cutter kind of mold to define yourself. I think that's the right use of that phrase. But a kind of a pre-designated, like a starter pack, you know, like a kind of, I don't think that's so helpful. It's a very blunt object. It's very, very sort of like, in a way, it's like a very like primitive way of understanding yourself. And it's very dependent on other people. And that's not how you should get to know yourself. You should get to know yourself. You should get to know yourself. You should grow to understand yourself. And other people can, of course, inform that. But when you define yourself as something like ADHD or autistic, you're just giving all of this to other people. And you're probably going to make so many oversights. Like if you have ADHD, or you believe that you have ADHD, there are many ways you could describe yourself more specifically. Like, you have a lot of trouble focusing. Okay, what things do you have trouble focusing on? Because it's probably not the same for everything. There are probably some things you have more trouble with than others. What makes it worse? What tends to have more of an impact on this? How long has it been for? Has it always happened? Is it worse in certain locations than others? Is it worse at certain times of day? Can it ever be beneficial? Etc., etc., etc. And for some people, maybe the term ADHD and everything that encompasses is a helpful starting point. Maybe, and maybe it can be. But I believe that for most people, these ideas are too rigid, and they get in the way of real self-discovery, and they cause you to to kind of blur the lines, or to kind of colour outside of them, of the lines of like who you really are. That's not how I want to describe it. I mean, they give you a picture and it kind of looks like you, and you go, wow, that picture was printed really quickly and looks quite good. Yeah, that's me. Bung that on the wall. That's a picture of me. It's not a picture of you. It's an amalgamation of lots of different people and lots of different things. And it's not fully accurate, and it's important to be accurate, it's good. And yeah, that's all really. So I sort of thought tonight, like just now, I was showering and I thought like I should probably stop thinking about this because it's not doing me any good. As soon as this came into my life, I think because I'm bored and I'm like, you always want more. I think most people, you want stuff and you want to feel better and like different and to be validated and stuff. So this idea kind of came into my life, and I don't know, but I feel like it hasn't done me much good. The good it's done is when I've looked at these times when I get very stressed and I struggle to like think straight, and my brain, like, it's very weird. Like it's very weird. There's a few different ways, sort of present itself. Sometimes it's like just latching onto things and I can't let go, and like obsessing over things. And sometimes it's, as I said, the very strange response to stress that, like, I realised recently is really not normal. And like I can't, like, I just, my girlfriend will be there, maybe we've had some argument or something. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes I just like, I can't, she'll be talking to me and I just can't answer, like, and I just shut down. Shut down is the best way to describe it. And I'm just staring at a space on the floor, and I'm just like, and like, I can't think, and all I feel is this just vague tension, like I'm blocking everything out or keeping it in or something, and I just feel like nothing apart from just vaguely uncomfortable and stressed and wrong. It feels unhealthy. It feels bad. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like a healthy process, And there's that and some other stuff. And so, yeah, to some degree it helped maybe to think, oh, I'm autistic, and I think I could look at those things more as, I have a problem and I have something wrong with me and I should work on it. It helped from that point of view, but I didn't need to think of it as autism, because I already realised when I was actually sat literally here, actually. I just remembered when I realised this, when I started thinking the way I feel right now is not normal, the way I'm processing my thoughts, because I started to become conscious of, like, it's kind of like rude what I'm doing, Like me and my girlfriend were having a sort of argument, kind of serious conversation, and I was doing what I very often do, and I was like, this is like weird, like, and it sort of makes it like hard for us to talk about things, and it's like rude, what I'm doing. And so I started thinking, and I was like, well, I can't stop. I feel like it's really hard to stop doing this. I'm like trapped in my own brain. And so I started to think about it, and that was how all of this came up, I remember. But I didn't need, the next step didn't need to be, oh, well, I'm autistic, and then I can think about it from that point of view. It could have just been, I clearly have a problem, whatever this thing is that I'm doing, whatever's happening to me, I clearly have a problem. Because since deciding, oh, it must be autism, I haven't looked specifically at that problem. I've been very generally looking at myself and going, oh, am I autistic in other ways? What do I do that makes me autistic? Let me do an online test and see if it says I'm autistic. And is this good or bad? What does it mean? Blah, blah, blah. None of that has been anything other than just sort of wanking myself off, you know, it hasn't been useful. Whereas if I had really dug down into this particular behavioural issue I would have made a lot more progress. So I think for me personally, that's a lot more useful and will be more useful moving forwards. What did I get? I got 57 out of 100 on the autism test. Some of my mates got higher scores. Then I did an OCD one and I got a very low score. I know these online tests are bollocks. I did it for a laugh. I wasn't really, you know, I was kind of curious and bored, and like I thought it would be kind of funny as well. So I did the test. My girlfriend got a ridiculously low score on the autism test. She got 21 out of 100. I had 57. And a couple of my mates I sent it to them, and they got higher scores than me. Depends how you look at it, doesn't it? Like, what's a good score? But then I did an OCD one, and my score was like incredibly low. But it goes to show that these tests are bollocks because my brain is like very obsessive, but I don't care that much about like cleanliness and tidiness, and all the questions were about that. And they were like, does it bother you when things are messy? And I thought, well, I'd be a bit of a hypocrite if it did, wouldn't I, really? You know, I mean, sure, I'd love to have a tidy home, but I can't really look at the, you know, like piles of clothes. I don't wear ladies' clothes, but, you know, still, just to give you an example of how we live. I just panoramize just all my ladies' clothes. Well, it's my girlfriend's stuff. She's out of town, so I've just fucking dumped all of her shit on the sofa and put mine away. But yeah, I love to have a tidy home, obviously, if it's free, but I can't say that I keep it that way. And all the questions were like, do you feel unclean and have to shower yourself constantly? I was like, no. But, you know, none of this means that I don't have extremely obsessive thoughts. So it's a bit silly, you know, and it's a bit the same with the autism test. It's a bit silly because you could have one of these symptoms very strongly to the point where it's clearly a problem, but have none of the others, and it would be like, you're not even slightly autistic. Or you could just have a little bit of all of them. Like, yeah, I'm quite, you know, specific about things. Yeah, it bothers me a little bit when plans change. Yeah. All of these things. All of them within a quite moderate range, and you would be classed as autistic, even though none of your behaviour is particularly extreme. So obviously the tests are kind of nonsense, and to some degree I think that's why often these definitions are not nonsense, but very, very, very flawed. We could very easily live in a different world where we didn't have a concept of autism, we didn't have a concept of ADD, we didn't have a concept of OCD. They could all be mixed up. They could have different names and take different parts of each one, and more people would have this and less people would have this, and you know, it's all subjective at the end of the day, and we're drawing lines and connecting patterns, which is apparently, according to this online test, something autistic people do. So yeah, that's all. Another thing I was thinking, actually, my camera's about to run out of space, but I think part of the reason, when I was, I used to smoke a lot of weed, and I think that, and the other drugs I took, I think masked or altered a lot of my, I won't call them symptoms, tendencies or predilections. I don't know if predilections is the right word, tendencies, behaviours that might otherwise be defined as autistic, because I realised, like, since I've stopped smoking weed and stuff, I feel more, like lately I'm getting very obsessed with stuff, like very into things, like, and sometimes I'm like, oh, this is very, very different from what I would have been doing back in my like drug taking, weed smoking days, where I just wanted to like sit and listen to music and be creative. And now I'm just like obsessively like using AI to make like flashcards and stuff, and like studying them, and trying to find ways of like doing really weird stuff, like weird technological stuff that I don't know why I like can't stop, and I'm just completely immersed in it. And yeah, so my brain has changed quite a lot. And yeah, I think weed in many ways is kind of like the opposite of autism. It might in some ways, maybe there are some aspects of the sort of typical high you get from weed that might be, that would run concurrently with autism. But I think generally, yeah, like it makes you, for example, as opposed to being oblivious to social cues, you become often like obsessed with them when you're stoned. And you're like, why did that person look? Why did they turn around? Why did they do this? And you're like, every detail, you're like micro-analyzing it, and like, and also less rigid in your thoughts when you're stoned. They're kind of like all over the place and more abstract and crazy and imaginative. So in a lot of ways, yeah. Anyway, that's all. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Hope you're well, as usual. Really interested to know your thoughts in the comments, and take care.